Okay, guys, I want to have a conversation with you today about Niagara Specialty Metals. I'm of the opinion, and just across conversations that I've had over the years with different people in the knife world, a lot of folks don't understand what or who Niagara Specialty Metals is. Maybe some haven't even heard the name, maybe some have, and they don't quite understand. So I want to explain to you who Niagara is and the role that they play in most of the steels that we use. Okay, firstly, they started in 1982. And essentially what they do, now granted they do more than this. They have other services, Blanchard grinding, laser cutting. They have some other things they do. But the primary function of Niagara Specialty Metals is that they buy ingots of steel from CPM for the longest time, many others, Carpenter. Well, sometimes they're just vendor and they roll the ingots into sheets that knife makers can use. So, but they play a bigger role in this than just that, and I don't think a lot of people realize it. You see, CPM doesn't roll their own steel. In the beginning, I believe they would send it to Niagara for them to roll it, and then they would go on to whoever the customer is. But as time went on and more grades developed, um, oftentimes some of your favorite steels perhaps wouldn't have been in supply enough if it weren't for Niagara raising their hand saying, "Yes, we'll take a full melt of that steel." The steels existed, but if nobody ordered them and rolled them and brought them to market, you wouldn't have necessarily had them. So, for instance, uh, CPM did about a 7,000 pound melt. That means if there was a grade of steel that they hadn't made and we wanted some, somebody would have to come along and take 7,000 pounds of that steel. Now, you may be a prolific knife maker or whatever, but I don't even know if Spyderco or Benchmade go through enough to buy an entire mount. Maybe eventually they would, but they'd be very reluctant to order it, and they certainly wouldn't want to have 5 or 10 grades ordered up in 7,000 pound increments. Now, CPM closes, and there's all this IP for all the grades 3V, crew wear, all these different grades, 20 CV, that CPM made for us. And now we need to get somebody else to make it for us. So who made it for us? Who's making it for us now? It's Aerosteel. I believe they're based in France, and the actual mill is in Sweden. So Aerosteel can now make some of these grades that the IP's been sold, and there's all kinds of other stuff I'm not going to get into. But now they can make these grades. But wait a minute, their minimum melt is not 7,000 pounds. Their minimum melt is now somebody has to raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'll take 1,000 pounds of that steel that you make." So in order for these steels to come to market, somebody's got to do that. And the only one doing that in the United States of America is Niagara. So although when you buy these steels, CPM, MagnaCut, CPM 4V, CPM 3V, when you buy these grades of steels, you see CPM on there, but you don't realize, although they're not making it, they're not melting it and producing the ingots, they are the ones that are bringing it to market. Because without Niagara, who's going to buy these steels and who's going to roll them? Now, Bowler over in Europe, they have their own rolls. They roll their own steel. So they can bring their steel to market. But if you've ever bought it from here, which I have, I bought some Van X a while back, and I had to buy a lot of it. It came from on the slow boat from Austria. It was going on $10,000 worth, and it wasn't that much steel. It ended up getting bent on the way here, so I lost some from that. And it was just a major headache. It was a major headache to get that steel from Böhler. I mean, there's potentially companies that will bring the Böhler steel in, but now they're going to mark it up, and it's already substantially higher. So if you're in the knife world and you appreciate these different steels and you like all these different kinds of steels, you need to realize that without Niagara, you wouldn't have many of them, and certainly not the number of grades. Now let's talk about new steels, okay? Let's talk about a steel like MagnaCut. Was CPM just on their own going to develop MagnaCut on an idea that Laren Thomas had? Were they just going to, we'll just make it and hopefully somebody buys it? No, no, no. It took the cooperation of CPM along with, again, Niagara saying, yeah, we'll take 7,000 pounds of that. And then they made it, they brought it to market. Without Niagara in this equation, we wouldn't have a lot of this stuff. So I think it's just important for people to realize the link in the chain that Niagara is. It's more critical than it might seem. In fact, I would argue that Niagara is a more critical link in the chain of steel than CPM themselves, because CPM needs somebody to buy the steel. And so not only does Niagara take it from these ingots, the ingots are about that tall and about that wide and about, well, they come in different lengths, and they're outrageously heavy when you get a piece of steel that thick and that big. And so somebody somewhere needs to want those steels, and it's Niagara who processes it, puts it in a form that we can use, and then sells it. They either sell it to the suppliers and vendors that we know, like Pops or New Jersey Steel Baron or Specialty, all the different companies that we know that we buy steel from. Well, they're buying it from them, and then they're breaking it down into, the vendors are breaking it down into bars that you can use. I buy, because I do a little more volume, I buy full sheets directly from Niagara, but I've gotten very familiar with how this process works. Another steel, Magna Max, that's being researched and checked out, and I was able to get a sheet of it, and I'm hoping to get a few more. But it's not even released yet. But without Niagara enabling and supporting these kinds of things, that steel couldn't come to market. I couldn't call Steel and say, hey, why don't you give this a shot? I think it'll sell pretty good. No, it needs the backing of a company like Niagara that says, yeah, we'll take 1,000 pounds of that. We'll buy a few sample runs, and then we'll commit. If it works, we'll commit to buy the rest, roll it, sell it. So all these steels, and you're going to see in some of the naming nomenclature of more of these steels that as time goes on, they're going to have Niagara in their name, or maybe not Niagara, but like NSM designations in certain steels. And you might wonder, what's NSM? Why does it say NSM? Because they're the ones making it happen. They're processing them. They're doing all these things that allow these steels to come to market. And so I just thought it was important to let you know a little bit about who they are, why they're important to the steel world, and how they're almost as critical. You could argue that they are more critical than even CPM themselves, because they were able to say, okay, CPM's not going to supply us this recipe. We're going to go over here to Aerosteel. They're going to supply us this recipe. Of course, there are complications. There are different ways that their mills work in Europe. Measurements are a little different. It's not as simple as just metric to empirical, but there are differences that have to be ironed out. And it costs money to send something heavy across the Atlantic Ocean. Now it costs money to pay tariffs on heavy things that are made of metal from Europe across the Atlantic Ocean. So some of you may have seen cost increases, and this is in part why. But I will say something about the Aerosteel. And I'm looking at 3 sheets of MagnaCut that was processed at Aerosteel rather than CPM. Theoretically, their machines are considerably newer. Let's be honest, CPM was struggling for a while. There was a lot of deferred maintenance. Their machines were getting tired. There was a lot of upgrades that would have needed to happen for them to stay competitive. And so Aerosteel is a newer, more modern facility. So the quality of these steels coming from Aerosteel, at a minimum, will be equivalent, if not perhaps even a little cleaner. So you have that to look forward to. So I hope this helps. I hope this kind of gives you a sense of how these specialty steels come to be and the process that they take. I hope that this has helped you understand a little bit about who Niagara is, their role in the entire process of getting these high performance grades to you, many of which would not exist without them. Thanks for tuning in. If you listen this long, go ahead and subscribe. And I try to put content out that's useful, whether it's for a maker or even just a knife collector or knife nut. Hopefully this is interesting to you. All right, have a good one. We'll see you next time.